What is the Volunteer Match Network? Imagine a world of volunteers looking for their perfect match.
When a nonprofit posts a volunteer opportunity on Volunteer Match, that opportunity has the potential to reach millions of interested volunteers. To illustrate the reach of our network, let's imagine that this piece of candy represents 10,000 people.
An average of 15 million people visit volunteermatch.org each year. In addition, each volunteer opportunity has the potential to reach 10 million pro bono and skilled volunteers through LinkedIn's Volunteer Marketplace. 2.6 million employee volunteers search for our opportunities from companies like Starbucks, Groupon, and JetBlue. And more than 500,000 employee volunteers from multiple corporate giving platforms have access to volunteer opportunities from our network. Since 1998, Volunteer Match has facilitated over 12 million nonprofit volunteer connections. Now that you know more about the reach of our network, get started by going to volunteermatch.org and posting your volunteer opportunity today.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you today to Shifting Paradigms in Healthcare and Human Services through the Conscious Service Approach. My name is Elizabeth Bishop, and I'm so honored that you have decided to listen to this webinar today. And I hope that you will leave feeling inspired in your service and more aware of what it means for you to engage in service consciously. I'd like to give you a little bit of background, just so that you can have a sense of how the conscious service approach evolved. For me, I was inspired to enter the field of human services at a fairly young age. I was a teenager, and I read a book that really inspired me, and I knew that I wanted to be working in a field of developmental services for specifically at that point in time. So that was my initial focus, and then I moved on into community-based rehab in brain injury rehabilitation and mental health and adult education. And throughout both my professional practice, my academic training, and then my involvement in the academic training of other service providers, I noticed a lot of gaps. And you might be aware of them yourself, but mainly in an umbrella term, the support that was available for service providers and the way in which we help people to become ready to enter a field of human services. But that's not exactly how the conscious service approach started to evolve for me. It actually started as more of a personal exploration. I was going through a challenging time in my life, and I got really immersed in personal growth and spiritual development, and just did a lot of soul searching, a lot of journaling, a lot of reading. I became a sponge. And it was not right away, it was over a period of time that I started to recognize the connection between what I was learning personally and the work that I was doing professionally in the service that I provided. And at that time, I was very lucky to be working for an open-minded organization who encouraged me to bring the material into the workplace and share it with team members in team meetings, in professional development training, and as a guide in a way for policies and procedures. I then went on to complete my Master's of Adult Education, and it was the perfect opportunity to bring this budding work into my academic research project. And it really started out with exploring how self-reflective practice can be encouraged in the helping professions. And that's then over time evolved into conscious service, because I could see that it wasn't just about self-awareness, that it had to extend beyond that into communication, into relationships and community building. So many people had told me that their stress came from dynamics with colleagues in organizational management, and I'd heard so many new practitioners talk about this feeling they had that they needed to harden up because of what they were witnessing in their service. And I instinctively knew there had to be a better way. So many service providers I had met, and including myself, had the sense that they were required to sacrifice so much of themselves, not only our time, our health, our well-being, but also the very sense of joy and fulfillment that we might experience in service to others. So some of the key concepts, and we're going to focus mainly on these as aspects of the conscious service approach, is that connection between the personal and the professional. So contrary to what we may have been, encouraged to believe, who we are personally has everything to do with how we show up professionally. Another element that is key to the conscious service approach is the emphasis of the joy and fulfillment of the service provider. So we don't spend a whole lot of time saying, hey, what brings you joy, and how do you feel that you're going to be fulfilled in your service to other people? And this, I believe, is a very much a missing element in the preparation of service providers and various helping professionals. Meaningful contribution. What makes the contribution that you offer in service to others meaningful for you? How do you want to show up in service to others? And as we pay attention to these key concepts, then we can expect that the quality of our service will also be enhanced. Now, I want to mention here right now that the conscious service approach is something that, for sure we're talking about it and thinking about it right now, but it doesn't mean a whole lot until we actually learn how to live it and bring it into our day-to-day lives and into our professional practice. So throughout the webinar, I've included a variety of self-reflective practice strategies. It's not all-inclusive list. And there may be some things that I introduce here today that you already engage in, and some may be new. I encourage you to try the exercises. Either pause the webinar as they come up in the moment and take a few minutes to engage, or take some time following the webinar to engage in some of these activities. Another key element of the conscious service approach is this whole idea of engagement. We're hearing more and more in the helping professions the importance of being in a state of engagement, of being present to the people that we're providing service to. So as I thought about this idea of engagement, I realized that it's not a static place. It's not some place we arrive at and then just stay within, that there's actually a continuum that we move along. Now, obviously, the sweet spot is the point of engagement, and that's what we're striving for. And what I find is that sometimes when disillusionment or discouragement sets in, we can move to either end of this continuum. So being engaged requires presence and self-connection, and that's where we find our sense of personal power. When we lose sight of our responsibility and purpose, or we lose sight of our role, we will tend to lose our sense of engagement. We can either forget where we end and others begin and move towards enmeshment, get very confused, feel drained and ineffective, or we may decide that we need to protect ourselves, that we need to toughen up, like I mentioned before, that we don't have any responsibility or any impact within the relationships and within our role. We can forget our role, we can become somewhat hardened, we may even become angry at the people we work with, and have an overall sense of being disconnected from others. At either end of this continuum, either way, we're disengaged. And on some level, we may have assumed some false responsibility. We're either operating in the future or the past, and we may have forgotten our roles. So to stay in a place of engagement, we must be connected to ourselves, because we can only really be engaged with another if we are connected to ourselves. So I want you to think a little bit about how these different points on the continuum might feel for you. So I'm asking you to think about how you feel. What I'd like you to do is try to connect to the actual feelings. So when we talk about enmeshment, what does that feel like for you? Does it feel like you have to protect other people from themselves? Do you have a sense that you have to control outcomes, that you have to come up with the answers for someone, that someone's success becomes your responsibility, or that their failure becomes your responsibility? On the opposite end of the spectrum, in estrangement, you might hear things like, oh, they don't pay me enough for this. This isn't in my job description. We might use philosophies like self-determination as a way of avoiding our role responsibility. Oh, that person made that decision or that choice. There's nothing I can do about it, when we know that we could potentially engage and provide an opportunity to reflect and explore with that individual some of the other options. And in estrangement, we may even start to feel like we have to protect ourselves. So if you could spend a few moments, again, pause the webinar if you like, or engage in this later, just connecting to how it feels for you when you're in a state of engagement. For me, engagement is peaceful, it's easy, there's clarity, I feel like I'm sure of my next steps, I feel very much present to what's happening inside of myself and the other person. And then consider how enmeshment and estrangement might feel for you. And it could be helpful to kind of reflect on times when you've experienced this before, and sort of conjure up those images for yourself so you can connect to the actual feelings. When we do this, we get an idea and we get a point, I suppose, that we can return to, or a cue that offers us the information that, oh, I've just stepped out of engagement. I'm feeling enmeshed right now, or I'm feeling estranged. And then consider, what are the things that help you to move back into a state of engagement? What helps you to return to that place of presence and self-connection? Now, I want to talk a bit about the role of love, which is not something that we often talk about when we're talking about being of service to other people. Sometimes there might be a sense that bringing love into the scenario is crossing boundaries, because we might think of love and loving relationships as only those relationships that we experience personally. But I wanted to present this from an alternative perspective. And if we could focus in on the energy of universal love, the love of humanity, the love of our fellow man, and consider how that is a part of service. And when we think about having boundaries, perhaps we can take the perspective of paying attention to our role. How can I be loving within the role that I am fulfilling in this moment with this individual? We have to remember that the people who come to us for service are often letting themselves be seen in very challenging situations, in troublesome periods of time in their life. They might be sharing very personal information that may lead to a sense of vulnerability. And that makes the service relationship intimate. Now, we might not be sharing our own perspectives from that place. We might not be sharing our own vulnerabilities in that same way. But in order for us to really fully connect with what's happening for another person, we have to become open-hearted and open-minded. And that, again, brings us into a state of intimacy. So there is a difference between the personal relationship and the service relationship. But to me, it's not about leaving out the love. So I have a couple of other questions here that I want to ask you to reflect upon. First of all, what do you love about you? And here I'm not speaking about, I'm really good at this, or I'm really good at that, or I always show up this way or that way. What do you love about yourself? What do you love about who you are? Maybe you love your sense of humor. Maybe you love your capacity to see the alternative perspective. Maybe you love how curious you are. What do you love about you? And what do you love about your work? Now, you could be at a time right now where maybe you're feeling a lot of frustration or challenges in your workplace, in your organization, and it might be hard to answer that question. So you might have to dig a little bit more deeply, even consider what motivated you into a helping profession to begin with, and what it was you were hoping to offer or contribute, and what you love on a really deep level. Sometimes you have to look at the energy here, the energetic presence that you have within yourself that you love, that gives you a sense of peace and self-connection, and the energy of the work connections and interactions that you have with other people, or the capacity that you have within your role to be creative, to develop new programs, to maybe simply just connect with other people. So think about those questions and take a few minutes to respond to that, because it's important that we learn to bring what we love about ourselves and what we love about our contributions more and more into the service that we provide. That can only enhance the quality. So I wanted to do a little bit of myth busting in this seminar. And the statement that I have on the screen right now: service is not about self-sacrifice. It is a reciprocal gift. I think this is one of the key paradox that we find in service, that we falsely believe that what we offer as far as our presence and our resources is coming from our human condition. And instead, I wonder if we could take the perspective that our human vessel is really just a channel for the expression of all those qualities that we say are so important to being of service. So things like unconditional positive regard, compassion, universal love, like we just talked about, respect, hope, resilience. To me, all of these are spiritual qualities that as human beings we have unlimited capacity for. It requires openness and willingness and curiosity and commitment. We don't have to struggle or strive for it. We simply open to it. And in that way, we are receiving as we give. And I wanted to point out here that I've found over the years for myself and for many other service providers that I've met, that it's often easier for us as service providers to give than to receive. Quite often we can see ourselves as the ones offering something and close ourselves off from receiving in our interactions. And I'm not talking about a tit for tat kind of thing where I give you this and you return the favor. It's about being so connected to our sense of contribution and so committed to bringing ourselves into service to others in ways that we enjoy and that honor who we are, which then creates opportunities to contribute in ways that are meaningful for you. Putting yourself fully into your connections with others, that allows you to receive a sense of fulfillment, a sense of what you're doing matters, that it is making a difference. That joy of shared energy and connection with another can be extremely powerful. And this can also lead to an awareness that your vocation is actually an avenue for the expression of your soul. And it really helps us to stop compartmentalizing who we are and brings us more fully and holistically into our service to other people as well as our other relationships personally. So here is a diagram of the conscious service approach. And we're going to focus mainly on this process element of the approach. So we're going to look at the aspects of self-connection, enlightened communication, transformative relationships, and co-creating community. And what you might notice with the little leaves that are going around in different directions here, it's all very interconnected and interactive. So we don't have to enter the process at self-connection, although that seems to make the most logical sense to me, I suppose, that we start where we are and go within and then connect outwards. But we can look at, say you're having something happening in your world right now where you feel like, geez, communication seems to be something that I would really like to grow in. And so you may want to look at the aspect of enlightened communication and then, how that plays into transformative relationships or how it brings you back to a sense of your own connection with yourself. So the idea is that the more connected we are to ourselves, the more capacity we have to engage in enlightened communication. We'll know what's going on inside of us internally. We'll be able to clear ourselves so that we can come into a place of personal power, like I'd suggested before, and then communicate from that point. And in enlightened communication, we have a much greater capacity to create transformative relationships. And of course, as our relationships become transformative, then our power to co-create community together will also heighten. Now, the active ingredient in the conscious service approach, this process, is self-reflective practice. So this is what we actually engage in order to keep coming back to ourselves and then connecting with other people and interacting in groups. The process, the approach itself is ever evolving. It's continuous. And as I mentioned before, it's a practice. And what I've been learning recently is that this approach is really about immersing ourselves in the gray area, getting comfortable playing with paradox, tapping into the energy of curiosity, learning how to master the alternative perspective, and then pushing the confines of our own, preconceived notions. And I think when we do that, then we actually come into the energy required to shift paradigms on a grander scale. So just a little bit more here about the conscious service approach. As I was mentioning, it's evolved so much for me over these past few years. And so I've broken things down into 3 phases. The foundational phase, which prepares us, looking at concepts around personal responsibility and being holistic, looking at, motivation and things like that, prepares us to get ready to engage in and enter the process, which is constructed of those 4 elements: self-connection, enlightened communication, transformative relationships, and co-creating community, with self-reflective practice weaving through. And then the 3rd phase is about integration. So how do we bring this back into our own personal experiences and connect our personal experiences back into what we do professionally? Again, what we learn informally and what we learn through lived experience is important and is vital to how we show up in service to others. This element of integration, this phase of integration, also covers those times when we may need to access service ourselves, or when we may be advocating on behalf of a loved one or actually being of service to a loved one. It helps us, integration phase helps us to hone in on the various points in our journey that have been turning points, have been points of power, have been opportunities for us to integrate and evolve. And then it also involves developing a plan of action so that we might continue to engage in conscious service and keep coming back to the concepts. So all of the phases include 10 guiding principles and 72 what I call cardinal truths. So today we're just going to focus in on the guiding principles that are related to the actual process of conscious service itself. So the guiding principle related to self-connection reads, the most meaningful pilgrimage you will ever make is the one that leads you to the core of your being. So as I mentioned before, it's beyond self-awareness. We're not talking here just about aspects of our personality, our habits. We're talking about self-connection, which means that we are focused on being in the moment. We don't connect with ourselves or with other people in the future or in the past. We connect here and now. So connection is about all aspects of who we are. And this might include our gifts and our talents or our areas for learning and growth. And it also involves our thoughts, our feelings, our physical sensations and our emotions, our desires, our fears and our beliefs, our values, our interpretations, our buttons and triggers. And this information is so valuable in order for us to actually be present to those we provide service to. If we want to demonstrate that we are with another, that we are engaged, we first must establish this within our own being. And that's actually how we stay connected to others. So think of it this way. If we're trying to ignore ourselves, we're more likely to miss intuitive guidance or physiological responses that have important information for us. So take judgments like biases, for example. If we're not connected to ourselves, we miss the opportunity to transcend judgment when our biases are triggered. If we're tuning in, then we'll feel the sensations of judgment when they arise, and we can take that moment to acknowledge it privately and then return our presence and engagement to the person who's in front of us. So here's an activity. Now, I know not everybody loves to journal. Some people love it, some people hate it, but most of us have had some kind of experience with it. And this is really, again, just one example of a self-reflective practice. And what I'm asking you to do here is to just engage for 5 minutes. So maybe set a timer, something like that, and just engage in free flow writing. So for me, quite often with free flow writing, I will start off with a bunch of junk that really doesn't mean much, but if I stay focused, it can become, and stay with it, it can become almost hypnotic and meditative. And over time, you'll start to see that little insights emerge. You start to get a little bit more connected to what's underneath some of that chatter that goes on for most of us mentally. I'm going to talk more in detail about powerful guiding questions later on, but I wanted to present one to you right now that you can engage in as a guide in this journal activity. There's actually 2 questions here. First of all, how do you honor your greatness? We just talked about what you love about yourself. We're talking about getting in tune with, who you are personally and how you wish to contribute. So how do you actually honor that greatness that you know is true about you? And then how do you contribute from your place of genius? It's so common in our day and age now that we don't want to embrace our strengths sometimes. We don't want to appear to other people that, that we're conceited or that we think too highly of ourselves. But we want to think highly of ourselves. We really do. And not in a boastful way. We want to remain humble and yet confident. We want to be able to stand in a place of personal power without lording it over other people. And that's what I'm talking about here when I talk about honoring your greatness, and then going the next step to determine how you contribute from that place of greatness or that place of genius. The guiding principle related to enlightened communication says, effective communication is mainly an intellectual practice. Enlightened communication emerges from spirit and utilizes all your resources. So enlightened communication is about the energy underneath it all. So I'd like you to just think about a time when you've been in an interaction with someone and they're doing all the quote unquote right things, using eye contact, body posture, respecting personal space. They're using iMessages. Their content is clear. Their words might even be sweet, and yet you feel the sting. That's where enlightened communication comes in. It's that force underlying the actual, concrete words that are being communicated, and it actually changes everything. So it's related to energies and qualities of authenticity, respect, intention, integrity. Now, I've got the next exercise is a peer dialogue, actually, and I included it because I thought it would be something that you could, again, take and engage in with a friend, a colleague, coworker, a family member outside of the webinar. And I included it because when I was completing my research project, I had a small group of mental health professionals who engaged in that process over 8 weeks. We did 3-hour workshops each week over 8 weeks. And a part of our integration process was peer dialogue. And all of them at the end in the evaluation said that it was one of the most powerful aspects of the overall project to connect with their coworkers, reflect on concepts we discussed, talk about their experiences in applying conscious service elements into their life and into their workspace as well. So I wanted to include it here. Of course, you would take a look at the powerful guiding question on your own first anyways, and then bring it into the dialogue with your partner. So I want you to think about what is the most powerful element of communication for you. So it could be something like authenticity, like I mentioned before, maybe compassion, respect, honesty, integrity, the way that you're delivering your message, your capacity to listen. And then I want you to think about, how do you actually live that? How does your behavior reflect that? And come up with actual examples of how you're doing it, because we want to make this real, right? And tangible. And then what about the times that you don't necessarily live it? I like to call these the exceptions to our own rules. So for example, I might say, I believe that all people deserve to be treated with respect, except for, that one other guy there at work that I don't agree with, for example. We all have these exceptions to our own rules. And these situations are extremely important to explore, because as long as we're staying focused on ourselves instead of another person, we have the opportunity to understand what happens to us when we go against ourselves, when we break our own rules, and ultimately when we're stepping out of integrity. We get a chance to tune into what it feels like when we're about to do that. And then that gives us, again, a very powerful moment that we can make a different decision. The guiding principle for transformative relationships says, nobody needs to be fixed, changed, or healed, not even you. Focus on transformation. Relationships are the container where the potential for transformation exists. So human relationships are at the heart of service, really, aren't they? Service providers have been encouraged to create boundaries that were intended to prevent them from burnout, but in my mind have actually contributed to its development and have impacted quality of service. Transformative relationships require presence, patience, commitment, partnership, and vision. And where there is that safe and supported space, people then feel free to emerge in new forms. So quite often, traditionally in therapeutic relationships, we're geared to look for change in the person who's receiving the services, right? And when that's not evident, we start coming at it from different angles, and we might even start seeing the person as damaged somehow, in need of fixing. And a different approach might be helpful, but it may be just as beneficial to examine the health of the relationship. It might be even more profound for us as service providers to explore how we're being transformed through the helping relationship as well. So transformation is not something we do, it's something we allow, something we create space for. And service providers who are connected to themselves and communicate from that place of authenticity are much better equipped to create and hold space for transformation to occur. This opportunity for transformation extends to colleagues and organizational leaders as well. So these qualities of transformative relationships apply no matter the context. So that balance, harmony, partnership, ability to have vision, all of that applies across the board to all relationships if we wish for them to be transformative. So when we deepen our capacity to create transformative relationships, then we shift the focus from fixing someone or something to engaging with others or engaging in a process and a journey of mutual evolution. And this creates the opportunity to witness growth in others and in ourselves. And to me, that's one of the fringe benefits of being in service. We might not necessarily go in saying, well, I'm going to transform myself through offering service to others. But when we are really present and engaged in the ways that I've been discussing, and that opportunity for transformation comes, then we are often recipients of that energy as well. So here's another experiential activity, little mini meditation or visualization that you can engage in. And I want you to start off by recalling a time when you were transformed, when you felt transformed. And really with this process, tune into those feelings when you recall this time. It doesn't have to be a formal scenario or a learning situation. It can be any interaction or relationship where you found yourself transformed. And I mean that maybe you suddenly saw something differently, you found out something new, had an insight, maybe a sudden awareness about yourself you hadn't noticed before, maybe a change of heart, a complete release of an old pattern or a behavior or habit. And just close your eyes, envision this experience in your life, and tune into how it felt. How did you feel during that? How would you describe it? And then tune into how you can create this same kind of experience with others. And then take a few moments to capture your insights. Now, finally, the guiding principle that's related to co-creating community says, the system does not exist without the people. You are always co-creating community. What are you creating? Revolution is an inside job. So with co-creating community, we're looking at how the individual creates the greater whole. We are exploring the impact and the interconnection of energetic, emotional, mental, and spiritual contribution, along with the more tangible elements of physical actions. It's really about learning how we can take back the reins of our experience, even within the larger system. I have found that it's often within the context of community that many service providers experience their greatest stress. So the striving to meet deadlines, budgets, mandates, missions, things that seem like they're imposed from beyond can lead us to feeling powerless and having no ability to affect change or experience growth. And when the dynamics between colleagues and managers are strained, the potential for disillusionment, disengagement, and burnout escalates. So this is where that whole us and them mentality is born. Fragmented organizations and communities do not function optimally, and eventually they break down in a number of ways, including employee sickness, high turnover, reduced quality of service, and all of that costs money. And on top of that, and probably more importantly, it's felt by those receiving services. So even if we're trying to keep it sort of behind closed doors, that energy permeates our organizations and our communities, and people feel it. So if you can even think about a time in your own experience where maybe there was some discord within your organization or agency, and you could feel it when you entered the building or entered the workspace, that something was off and it felt perhaps tense or just, uncomfortable. The people who are receiving services can feel that energy too, even if they don't have the, details about what's going on. And what I find is interesting is that healthcare and human services organizations are often the least healthy places of employment. I don't know if you notice that as well. There appears to be this disconnect between what we know is beneficial within helping relationships and then how those very same qualities and principles can enhance our interactions with everyone else. And I really feel like it's time to take those innate strengths and natural talents of the individuals who make up the system and utilize them in ways that lift our organizations and communities to a higher level of health and function. And I believe, too, that regardless of our role in the organization or in the community, that everyone can learn to step into a place of personal power, self-leadership, and dig into the capacity that we all have to affect change from our current position and within our current role. To me, there's nothing more exhilarating than knowing who you are, what you contribute to the greater picture, and then how to foster opportunities for that contribution to be expressed in real ways. Taking back our power, the power that maybe we didn't know we handed over to, quote unquote, the powers that be, and learning how to, feel like we actually can move forward and that what we do has an impact. And really, one of the most powerful ways of noting that is when we stay connected to ourselves and watch our own growth and evolution. Because we all know that, change for human beings tends to be kind of slow and subtle, right? And, you can sort of liken it to trying, watching water boil on the stove. It takes a lot longer when we've got something under a microscope like that and we're waiting for it to happen. But if we tune in for ourselves every day and ask that kind of a powerful guiding question, how was I transformed today? What looks new to me today? Now, some days you might have really profound insights and other days you might be feeling like, I don't know. But asking the question is going to help the answer and the insight to reveal itself. When that space that we're functioning within is genuinely inviting input and personal expression, then there's an opportunity for unbridled creativity, infusion of passion, and an overall sense of synergy within the system. And who doesn't want to work in an organization or an agency like that? So here's a little bit more information about powerful guiding questions. Just a few tips. So I was starting to say that, when we ask a question, our brain naturally starts to seek out the answer. I mean, we've opened up a door. And, it's almost like, you say even, oh, I want to have a red car, or I really like that, purple vehicle or whatever it is. And then you start to notice it everywhere. So kind of the same principle applies. When we ask a question, our mind and all of ourselves actually open up to information that we can receive that points us in the direction of the answer. Starting our questions with what or how make them more powerful. It's more expansive. When we ask why questions, they tend to be less effective because quite often why questions have us focused on the past, attempting to undo what maybe has already been done. And why questions can also lead to a sense of self-punishment or blaming others or feeling like we have to justify. It doesn't really soothe us in the moment, So a lot of the questions a lot of the why questions we might ask don't often have satisfying answers. So if we ask what or how, we're more likely to start to illuminate our next steps. When questions are similar to why questions, and that we're focused on the future, we're longing for some, unknown day when everything's going to be okay. And so really what we want to do is be asking questions that help us to focus into the present moment. Those are most powerful and will give us guidance for what we can do next, or help us to understand what's happening now. Once we've asked the question, we want to try to do our best to let go of it and try to open our mind and our heart and our eyes and pay attention to any signs or guidance or information that we might be getting along the way. So like I was just saying, we don't want to watch the pot boil, The more emotionally attached that we are to the answer, the more difficult that this might be. So if we find that we're having a hard time letting go or detaching from the outcome or the answer, then we can ask another powerful guiding question, like, how can I detach from this right now? You want to ask questions that focus on your personal guidance as opposed to something you feel or think that someone else needs to do, change, or know. We can ask powerful guiding questions of other people as a means of helping them to explore their own answers and get into their own, intuition and personal guidance. But asking, things like, what can I do to make Tom change his mind is probably not going to be overly effective. It doesn't keep us in the moment. It doesn't keep us focused on ourselves. And it's not necessarily powerful from a personal kind of perspective. You can also ask questions in the form of a statement. Show me what I need to know. Help me understand how I can help you right now. Those are equally as powerful in accessing guidance. And one of the most important things I believe as far as asking questions and receiving the information is to really listen to your heart. Our minds like to argue with things. Have you noticed that? So especially if the answer you're receiving is going to demand courage or stepping outside of your comfort zone, you might find that your mind gets involved there because our ego wants to keep us safe. So it will say anything to keep us from going out on a limb or taking a risk. But the heart always knows. So try to tune into what your heart knows to be true and what that feels like when you hear that guidance from within on that level, your heart and your soul. And when you don't know, like when the information is not coming, wait for as long as you can and continue to ask the questions, or maybe even formulate new questions. So I would like you to take a moment to consider your current role within your organization or your community, or within, any other groups that you might belong to. Consider, what are you creating right now? So you might want to think about, is there something happening in one of the programs? Is there a certain problem that you're trying to solve within the organization? Is there a dynamic that doesn't feel aligned? What's happening right now? What are you creating? How do you want to contribute? And then craft a powerful guiding question that can help you to move in the direction of that desired contribution, something that you can use almost like a mantra. Okay, so integrating all of this. As I mentioned before, conscious service is a lived experience. It evolves along with you. So creating a plan that allows you to enhance your sense of self-connection, improve your capacity for enlightened communication, so you can create transformative relationships, and then step into your power as a community co-creator, is really important to making this actually meaningful and tangible in your life. And it's something too that you want to stay connected to, because as you live and grow and experience things, you will notice that what conscious service means to you personally and professionally will evolve along with that. So it's something that you always want to come back to. Where you decide, when I ask the question, what did you learn today that you can apply tomorrow? I always encourage people to start with what holds the most power for you right now. So you may have really resonated with something in this webinar that was like, yes, that makes so much sense, and that's a direction that I'm already moving and I want to keep going. And that's great. It just slides right into your current frame of reference. Alternatively, you may have felt resistance to something that I offered in this webinar, and that's equally powerful as well. So if you have curiosity about the resistance that came up in you, then that may be a place that you want to start. So in either direction that you feel inspired to go, or you feel there's something that you want to remove from your experience, that is always the best place to start, whatever feels most relevant to you right now. I'd like you to think about your level of engagement in your life, in your current position. Think about the engagement continuum and think about where you are as far as that sweet spot of engagement, or any areas where you may feel a bit enmeshed or a bit estranged, and kind of explore those opportunities to get a really good solid sense of how each of those points in the continuum feel to you. Consider what is one little thing you can do to bring more of who you are to what you do. And then what resources and supports would help you to do that. That can become part of your plan as well. So that's a lot. I hope that you found something useful in there that will help to guide your journey. The slide that I have up right now has my contact information on there. And if you're curious or would like to learn more about the conscious service approach, I really welcome you with open arms to connect with me at my website if you like. All the social media links are there. Of course, the contact information is listed here, and it's listed there as well. And also, you can hear replays of Serving Consciously, which is an internet-based radio show that I host twice a month. I've had some absolutely phenomenal guests on that show who've shared their experience in walking the path of conscious service and how they integrate the concepts and values and qualities and principles into their own lives, professionally and personally. I'm also currently creating a wait list for anyone who's interested in my online programs and courses. You can learn more about that at the website as well. And if you'd like to be the first to know, please sign up and leave me your email address, and I'll update you as soon as the next sessions are getting ready to begin. Thank you so very much for engaging in this webinar and taking your time to listen to what I had to offer about conscious service. I really do hope that you have taken away something today that you can bring into your work life, into your personal life, and that you can tap into to experience even more joy and fulfillment in service to others. And remember that you are the most valuable resource you can offer in service. I would love to hear any feedback, any insights, any questions that you may have with regard to conscious service, so please do feel free to connect. And happy Social Work Day. Wishing you all the very, very best.